Welcome back, St. Paul American School Clark ninth graders. Today, we're diving into a brand new explainer where we get to become, essentially, architects of information. We're going to explore exactly how to analyze an author's blueprint and then how to draft our very own. You know, when you read a compelling story or a truly fascinating article, those big ideas, they don't just magically appear out of thin air. They are incredibly carefully constructed. And when you're writing to inform other people, you have to build that information just as carefully. So grab your hard hats because we're going to learn how to break down complex ideas and then build up some perfectly structured news reports.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with today's objectives, then move into analyzing idea development, crafting a news report, looking at the inverted pyramid model, running a quick misconception check, and wrapping it all up with a formative check and recap.
Section 1. Today's objectives. We've got two main goals on our radar today. First up, we really want to inspect how master authors construct and refine their central claims over the entire course of a text. And second, we're going to take that structural knowledge, flip it around, and put it to work to build our own objective, strictly informational news reports.
Moving right into Section 2, Analyzing Idea Development.
So, authors don't just state a central idea on page 1 and then abandon it, right? That would be incredibly boring. Instead, they actively shape and refine it as the text goes on. Think about heavy themes, like guilt or obsession. An author doesn't just write, "he felt guilty," and call it a day. They build that feeling up, literally, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph. They'll use highly specific details, or maybe a super carefully chosen sentence structure, or a really revealing piece of dialogue in one section to layer on top of what they built in the last section. And your job as an analytical reader, it's to track that development. You constantly have to ask yourself, wait, how does this specific paragraph actually change or deepen the central idea they introduced earlier?
Which brings us to Section 3, Crafting a News Report.
Now, the absolutely crucial point here is that journalistic writing demands objectivity, period. This is the main thing that separates journalism from a lot of the other writing you do in English class. Your goal here is strictly to inform the public fairly, so they can draw their own conclusions. You're not trying to convince them to agree with you. You aren't inserting your own opinions, your prejudices, or what journalists refer to as bias. It's like you're acting as a clear, polished mirror, just reflecting events exactly as they happen in reality.
And to be perfectly objective and completely thorough, the introduction of your news report, which in the biz we call the lead, absolutely must answer these critical questions. We call them the W5 plus H. Who is the story about? What actually happened? Where did it take place? When did it occur? Why did it happen? And how did it unfold? If you can nail those 6 questions right out of the gate, you're giving your reader exactly what they need to instantly grasp the core of the event.
Let's look at Section 4, the inverted pyramid model.
This right here is the industry-standard structural blueprint for a news report, the inverted pyramid. Notice how it's totally upside down? The heaviest, most vital facts sit right there at the top, which is the complete opposite of a traditional essay where you kind of build up and save the big conclusion for the very end. So why do we do this in a news report? Well, because most people don't read a newspaper or a news site from top to bottom like they're reading a mystery novel. They skim. They want to instantly know what happened. By dropping the most important information right at the top, readers can decide literally immediately if they want to keep going.
Let's break down how this actually builds layer by layer. You start with the lead, grabbing the reader with those absolutely crucial factual questions we talked about, the W5 and H. Then, you taper down into the body. This is where you bring in your supporting details and, super importantly, quotations from people who were at the scene or maybe experts on the subject. Quotes add massive credibility, right? Because they prove it's not just your personal opinion. Finally, the pyramid tapers all the way off at the end with the least essential, kind of less interesting background details. And there's a practical reason for this. If a newspaper editor needs to cut an article to make it fit into a tight space on a page, they always chop from the bottom up. This structure guarantees the most critical information survives the cut.
All right, Section 5, Misconception Check. We really need to pause here because when you shift from writing traditional English essays into journalistic writing, the actual physical structure on the page changes drastically. In a standard essay, you're probably used to writing these beefy 5 to 7 sentence paragraphs. But in a news report, paragraphs are strictly factual and, get this, they are often just 1 to 2 sentences long. That's it. This makes the text incredibly punchy and super fast to read. You also have to remember the core difference in purpose. A news report is 100% objective and factual, whereas an editorial or an opinion piece is subjective and actively aiming to persuade you. For this assignment, we are living firmly in that objective 1 to 2 sentence paragraph territory.
Section 6, Formative Check and Recap. Let's see what we've got.
So, think back to that inverted pyramid diagram we were just looking at. If you have the absolute most critical facts about an event, the who, what, when, where, why, and how, where exactly do you place them in your structural blueprint?
It belongs right up there at the top in the lead. Putting it in those very first 1 or 2 paragraphs allows readers to just skim the headline and boom, they immediately grasp the core of the story without having to hunt around for it. To quickly recap our whole journey today, we've learned that reading really requires us to analyze how authors actively refine and shape their central ideas across specific sentences and sections of a text. And on the flip side of that, we learned that when we sit down to write our own news reports, we have to maintain strict objectivity. We leave our biases at the door. And we execute that by structuring our reports using the inverted pyramid, front-loading all the vital information right in the lead, backing it up with solid quotes in the body, and leaving the basic background for the end.
I want to leave you with one final thought for today's explainer. If you can actually master the architecture of how master authors build their ideas, literally taking them apart to see how the gears work, how unbreakable and how powerful will your own informational writing become? It's kind of a game changer. Think about that as you start drafting your reports. Thanks for joining me today, 9th graders, and happy building.